Good morning. Welcome back. We're back from our 30th anniversary extravaganza, which was something like 10 days, 9 nights, where we wandered our way through Michigan up to Mackinac Island, where we had celebrated our honeymoon 30 years ago. But we're back, and today is September 5th. I know, where did August go? Where did the summer go? But today is September 5th. Let's talk about what happened on this date before we get back into talking about Isaiah. Well, first of all, in 1622 in France, Armand Jean du Plessis, the Duke of Richelieu, was appointed a cardinal in the Catholic Church. Now, interestingly, Richelieu was already a very well-placed individual. He was a bishop, and he was certainly in the Catholic Church. He had been the foreign minister during the administration of Louis XIII, who was the king of France at that time. He was known by a number of names: L'Eminence Rouge, or the Red Eminence, based on how powerful he was and the red robes that he wore during, because he was a cardinal. He was two other interesting things about Richelieu. First of all, he was painted very clearly, or I don't know, clearly is the right word, but very much as the bad guy. If you've ever read Alexandre Dumas's book, The Three Musketeers, you know that one of the bad guys, if not the bad guy in the book, is Cardinal Richelieu. But that came out in like 1840 or something like that. And also, there was a play that was very popular in the 19th century called Richelieu, which was kind of a biography of the story of his life. And Edwin Booth, the great Shakespearean actor, made kind of a career out of playing Richelieu. Here's a picture of Edwin Booth as Richelieu. Edwin Booth, you may not know who he is, but you probably know his brother. John Wilkes Booth is the guy who shot Abraham Lincoln. But on this date, 1622, Richelieu becomes a cardinal. In 1651, in Boston, Obadiah Holmes is publicly whipped for privately teaching Baptist views. Now, this is kind of an interesting story. Okay, so Obadiah Holmes is somebody who started out as a Congregationalist or a Puritan, and he was in Rhode Island. He comes back to Massachusetts. Rhode Island, if you know your American history, Rhode Island had a history of being far more accepting of these different kind of views, as opposed to the Calvinist, Puritan type. But for a series of circumstances, he ended up back in Massachusetts and gets caught teaching Baptist views, and ultimately he's fined. He won't pay the fine, so they publicly whip him. Now, the interesting thing is, these are Protestants, okay? These are Protestants that are doing the whipping, okay? I know those of us in the Protestant camp like to think about, persecution from other religions, or whether Catholic or something else. But these were Protestants that were doing the punishing of Mr. Holmes, and from a church doctrine standpoint, one of the reasons why the Baptists and the Anabaptists in particular are adamantly separation of church and state is because it is our experience, being a Baptist, that once a religious group gets control of the government, they tend to clamp down on any other views. And so here you have a situation where this man was publicly whipped for being a Baptist by Protestants. Okay, but that took place on this date in 1651. Incidentally, Obadiah Holmes, speaking of interesting links, Obadiah Holmes is Abraham Lincoln's great grandfather. So five greats grandfather. So again, going back, tying into Richelieu, Obadiah Holmes, etc. In 1960, Cassius Clay won the Olympic gold medal for the light heavyweight division in Rome that year. Of course, Cassius Clay would later go on to change his name, adopt Islam, and become Muhammad Ali. But he first gained fame in 1960. He was like 18 years old at the time. He's a really young guy, light heavyweight championship. In 1966, This was the premiere of the first Jerry Lewis Muscular Dystrophy Association telethon. Those of us of my age, we grew up watching the Jerry Lewis telethon every Labor Day. But his first one was on this date in 1966. Now, I couldn't find any pictures of the first telethon. Maybe they didn't think it was going to last. But like I said, those of us who grew up remember watching this quite a bit. And it was on this date in 1976 that we first heard that it was time to start the music, it's time to light the lights, it's time to get things started, because today is the day that the Muppet Show premiered on TV. So, again, I did not watch Sesame Street as a kid, but I did watch the Muppet Show when I could. Fun show. Muppet Show premiered on this date in 1976. Going back to France, today is Louis XIV's birthday. Louis XIV was born on this date in 1638. A very long, I think the longest serving king of France, the Sun King. He's the one who said, "L'État c'est moi," I am the state. The kind of the stereotypical example of what they call an enlightened despot. So remember, Richelieu was during the reign of Louis XIII. His successor, Mazarin, who becomes a character in later Musketeer novels. Side note, did you know that there are 5 novels about the Three Musketeers? Okay, we tend to think that it's just the Three Musketeers. No, there's actually 5. The Man in the Iron Mask is the last of those novels, and there's 10 years later, or 20 years later, or 10 years after, 20 years later, something like that. But there are actually 5 of those novels, the D'Artagnan novels, I believe they're called. But today in 1638 is Louis XIV's birthday. In 1847, Jesse James, the famous outlaw, was born. Now, we have been to the place where Jesse James was shot and killed. You know, the dirty little coward that shot down Mr. Howard, as the song goes. We took our family there, took our boys there. We also took our boys to the Tower of London to see where a lot of executions took place. Other parents took their kids to Disney World and the like, and we took our kids to places where executions and people were killed. That's kind of the parents that we were, and are, I guess, for that matter. But it's on this date in 1847 that Jesse James was born. Today in 1929, Bob Newhart was born. Comedian Bob Newhart, born in Oak Park, Illinois. Actually started out as an accountant here in the Chicago area. Later went on to great fame as a comedian and TV star. Bob Newhart Show, Newhart, etc. You've seen him. Incidentally, Bob Newhart is still with us. He's in his early 90s, but he is still around and still doing stuff. And I know I follow him on Facebook or something, some social media. I follow him, and every once in a while he does put out a post. So he is still with us. And finally, in 1951, today is Batman's birthday. I know you're thinking, wait a minute, Batman? I mean the one and only Batman, the only Batman that really matters. And of course, that is Michael Keaton. Michael Keaton, born on this date in 1951. All right, well, let's get back to talking about Isaiah. We're only going to cover one chapter today, but there's a lot there because there's a major shift as we get into talking about the second half. The second part of Isaiah. So let's get back to talking about that. Welcome back. We're here today to talk about Isaiah 40. Now, we're only going to get through one chapter today, although it is one of probably the top 5 chapters in Isaiah as far as popular verses and things that get quoted. But there's a lot of stuff we really want to go over before we get into chapter 40 through 66. Okay, and let's review for a little bit what we already know about Isaiah. Okay, so Isaiah is a prophet, and we know from the 2 Kings 18 through 20 that point that Isaiah is a prophet around the time of the kingships of Jotham, Ahaz, and Hezekiah in the south, Judah. Okay, so we know there's this real prophet named Isaiah, lives during these time periods. Okay, and he interacts with again, specifically Ahaz and Hezekiah, and we talked a great deal about them. Okay, and first chapters 1 through 39. The first 5 chapters are this indictment. This is what the nation of Israel was like during the time of Isaiah. In chapter 6, you have Isaiah's calling, who shall go, I'm a man of unclean lips, etc. Okay, 7 through 9, you have this test of Ahaz, okay, that first king, dealing with this existential threat from the combined forces of Syria and Israel, the northern kingdom. Okay, Ahaz fails that test, and then beginning in chapters, 10 through chapter 35, you have a series of oracles and judgments and pronouncements that says, someday this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to do all this kind of stuff. I'm going to do all this kind of stuff. And there's the apocalypse of Isaiah and all these bad things that are going to happen to these other nations, and again, all kinds of stuff. Then in 36 through 39, you see the fruition of this. You see this invasion by Sennacherib, where the Spirit of the Lord, or the angel of the Lord comes in, and 185,000 of the Assyrian soldiers are killed. You see, Hezekiah's sickness. You see Hezekiah's meeting with the Babylonians. Okay, so you see these events that very clearly deal with the personal presence of Isaiah. All right. Now, if you read through the book of Isaiah, and I mean, if you carefully read through it and kind of to get a picture of the overall narrative or the overall development of the text, you clearly see a shift beginning in chapter 40. Okay, and for years, everybody knew this, and then beginning in about the late 19th century, when you really, in the world of biblical scholarship, you started to see a movement away from the idea that predictive prophecy is possible. That is to say, that prophets could tell the truth about the situation. They could be forth-telling, as we like to talk about it today. But they couldn't foretell. They couldn't predict the future, because that's just impossible. Again, this is taking a very low view of Scripture, taking a very low view of the ability of the prophets. Okay, and so chapter 40 and on, you look at it, and we'll see that today. You'll see there's a very definite change in tone. There's a very definite change in topic. And in a sense, most people look at this and say, okay, we know that Isaiah, what we call the book of Isaiah, was collected around the time of the Babylonian captivity. So this is like decades after the actual death of, who knows, maybe 150 years after the actual death of Isaiah the prophet. And so they put together these writings, and this first book, this first part, chapters 1 through 39, is clearly dealing with messages that Isaiah gave in real time, at the time. These are things that said. Now, looking at chapter 40 and beyond, this is a message that seems very clearly addressed to those in captivity. Now, if you're starting from the position that predictive prophecy isn't possible, then there's no way that Isaiah could have known this, and therefore this had to be done by someone else. Okay, and so it was very popular, especially beginning in the 20th century, where people would say, well, this is a second author. And then they went a step further and said that beginning with chapter 56, I think it is, it's 55 or 56, somewhere in there. Again, side note, chapters and verses are not part of the original text. Okay, so it's an arbitrary division that came out in the 12th century, 5th and 12th century. Okay, so back to the original point. So somewhere around chapter 55 or 56, there's another shift. And that other shift looks like it's addressed to those who have returned. So again, in the history of Israel and Judah, you have these captivities. The northern kingdom, Israel, is conquered in around 700 BC. The southern kingdom, Judah, is conquered around 586 BC. Then they're in captivity for a period of time. Daniel kind of talks about that. Then Ezra and Nehemiah talk about the return, where they come back. And this last part of Isaiah seems to be talking to those individuals. And again, when we get to that, we'll see how that works, okay? And so if you're starting from a position that predictive prophecy can't be done, that there's no way Isaiah could have known that, then you say, well, wait a minute. Isaiah clearly wrote these first 39 chapters, what's included in these first 39 chapters. Somebody else wrote what's in chapters 40 through 55, those 15 chapters, 15, 16 chapters. And then somebody else wrote the last 10 chapters of the book. Okay, and so it's very common, especially if you're looking at a very modernist, and I say modernist, not necessarily modern, where people will talk about first Isaiah or second Isaiah or third Isaiah. Okay, and so second Isaiah could mean either anything written or whoever wrote chapters 40 through the end of the book, or it could mean chapters 40 through 55. And third Isaiah, which is a later addition to the whole thing, is to say, okay, that's chapters 55 through 66 or 56 through 66. Okay, but you clearly have this division. But if you start from the position that, no, wait a minute, Isaiah could have gotten this message from the Lord, it could have been written out knowing, and then when the people put it together during the Babylonian captivity, they could have said, okay, let's group all of these together and put them here, let's group all of these together and put them here. Okay, now if you're starting from a position that predictive prophecy is something that could be done, then of course you say, well, yeah, Isaiah could have gotten this message from the Lord, he wrote it down. Isaiah might not have understood at the time what he was talking about, but he would have known that at some point. So for example, today we're going to talk about comforting the nation of Israel after everything is done. Now it doesn't take a rocket scientist to know that at some point Isaiah could have looked at it and said, well, at some point all of this is going to be taken care of, and what would I say to those guys then? Well, let's write it out. So even without the idea of inspiration or being moved, along the line of 2 Peter 1:21 talks about, Isaiah could have just reasoned it out and said, well, what about when this all happens? I'm not going to be around, so what message would I write to myself? Or to my people, and again, people do this kind of stuff all the time. I mean, you hear about, people in school, write a letter to your 35-year-old self or something like that, and don't open it, and or something like that, or parents or people who leave wills. That's it's something that's to be opened in the future, or some message to the future. One of the things, we were on Mackinac Island, and we were at this fort that's on the mainland there, Fort Michilimackinac. Really interesting place. Highly recommend it if you ever go there. But so there's this flagpole there, and in this flagpole, they took, there's a story about when they first built this flagpole, dug the hole for this flagpole, somebody put in a letter in a bottle, kind of like a time capsule thing at the bottom of it, okay? And so that would have been, I don't know, like 1780 or 1790, something like that, late 18th century, okay? So 20 or 30 years later, they had to replace the flagpole, so early 19th century, 1810, 1820, again, I don't know the exact dates, but somewhere around early 19th century, 1820, something like that, they dug up the flagpole, and when they dug up the flagpole, they got out this time capsule. Okay, so they got out this time capsule, and when they went to put the new flagpole in, the records indicate that they did another time capsule to send this message in the future. Well, the interesting thing is this other time capsule, this other message in a bottle, has never been found. So they kind of assume it's down there somewhere, but this kind of idea, you're writing a letter for the future to read. And so we do that today without having the inspiration of the Holy Spirit. So it is entirely conceivable that Isaiah could have done that. Okay, and I think he did. I think that's kind of, Isaiah was just sitting there and thinking of himself. And again, I believe he was acting under the inspiration of the Holy Spirit as well. So it's kind of an important consideration. But he could have very easily thought, well, what would I say? What would I say to them? 20 years from now, 30 years from now, or whenever this whole thing takes place. Okay, so again, everybody who looks at Isaiah recognizes, again, if you're looking at it from kind of macro level, a big picture. Now, if all you're doing is reading through, looking for proof text verses, I'll go, oh, that's a great verse. You're not going to see any of this. You get kind of like what we're trying to do here. Kind of take a step back, get the big picture of what the book is about. How does each passage fit into the bigger picture of the book? What did the original readers think? You will see this very clearly, this difference of opinion, or this difference in tone, difference of topic, change of pace, kind of thing. Okay, so that's kind of what we're getting into when we get into chapter 40. And in fact, even a lot of the commentaries, like this one, the first one was chapters 1 through 39. This is a 2-volume commentary. So the second one starts chapters 40 through 66. Okay, so everybody kind of has this division or recognizes this division in Isaiah. Okay, so if you see somebody says, oh, this is second Isaiah, then you know it's chapter 40 through the end. Now, is it a hill to die on? I don't know. To me, I don't think it is, but I'm not going to die on that hill at this point. It's at some point in the 8th century when or not the 8th century, but in the 6th century, 5th or 6th century, when they put this together, they looked at all these writings and said, this is part of this text that we're going to call the book of Isaiah. Okay, and the words are as inspired to me as if Isaiah himself had written them in the 8th century, or somebody else, one of his disciples or descendants or whatever, had done it in the 6th. Okay. But regardless, I believe that it's all Isaiah all the time. This is just a change of topic, change of tone, because it's a different topic. Okay. So, having said that, let's talk about Isaiah chapter 40. Okay. Now, 40 through 55, this passage seems to be addressed to those in captivity. Okay, so in other words, all of these things that have happened in the past, all of these things that have happened, all of these judgments and have come to pass more or less. I mean, I'm not saying they're exactly one-to-one. Okay, but the end result is that the nation is in captivity. Okay, now the nation was spared from Assyria. But as we learned in Isaiah 39, when Isaiah says to Hezekiah, wait, you showed this is the Stand translation, you showed the Babylonians everything. Well, now all of that stuff is going to be in the Babylonians someday, kind of stuff. Just kind of a warning that, I got you out of the Assyrians, and so maybe this would be an opportunity for the nation of Israel to repent, to become the kind of nation that God had always intended it to be, and instead they don't. Okay, and so ultimately you have the Babylonian captivity, you have Daniel, you have all that, okay, kind of stuff kind of going on. Okay, so with that shift, let's start talking about Isaiah 40. Now, Isaiah 40, it is they're in captivity, so the nation is in captivity. It's addressed to a nation in captivity, and it answers 3 questions. Isaiah chapter 40 really addresses and answers 3 questions. Okay, so the first question it asks is, does Yahweh, does the God of Israel, the Holy One of Israel, does Yahweh want to rescue us, to deliver us? Okay, that's the first question. The second question is, can Yahweh deliver us? Does Yahweh have the ability to deliver us? Okay, and we'll expand on this. We'll expand on all of these as we get to them. And number 3 is, will Yahweh deliver us? Okay, so the first question, does Yahweh want to deliver us, is the first 11 verses 1 through 11. And again, verses 1 through 11 is a very, very well-known passage in Isaiah. And then secondly is, can Yahweh deliver us? And that's verses 12 through 26, the middle section of the verse, of the chapter, I should say. And then the third question is, will Yahweh deliver us? That's the last 5 or 10, whatever, 5 verses, 27 through 31, ending with verse 31, which of course is probably one of the most popular verses. Clearly, of all of the greatest hits, certainly this is one of the top 10. They that wait upon the Lord shall renew their strength, etc., etc. So, all right. So, having said that, let's look at chapter 40, verses 1 through 11. And what's interesting about this first passage is there's a progression of voices that you hear. And that's what we really want to look at. It's kind of interesting to look at as we look at the text and kind of see what is going on. Okay. Verse 1, comfort my people, says your God. Speak tenderly to Jerusalem and cry to her and tell her, okay, and cry to her. Okay, so say things. And so it's a comfort people. That's all worry. Comfort Israel. Everything's going to be okay. Let me tell you three things. Okay, so there's three things that somebody needs to say to Israel. Okay, and one, that her warfare is ended, that her iniquity is pardoned, that she has received from the Lord's hand double for all her sins. Okay, so what is this point? Now, here's one of the reasons why we get the idea that this is after all of this, these judgments, because now it says the warfare is ended. Okay, your warfare is ended, your iniquity is pardoned, and she has received from the Lord's hand double for all her sins. Okay, these judgments that I've been talking about have all come to pass. So this judgment part is over. Now go back to what we talked about in chapters 1 through 39, that the judgment was never the point. Okay, the relationship that the judgment would lead into was the point. So the fellowship that came after the judgment, the restoration after the judgment, this is the point. And I think here that what Isaiah is saying in this passage is, tell Israel, okay, we're beyond that judgment point, and now we're going to start talking about this restoration of the relationship. Okay? And who is doing this talking? Well, this is intentionally left blank. We don't know. Okay? Who is being given this? Is it Isaiah? And again, if this is actually being talked about later, I mean, if Isaiah is writing this in the 8th century to be read in the 6th century, who is he talking to? Okay, who's the one doing the speaking? We don't know. It's intentionally left blank. Okay, so this is the first question about the voice. Okay, but here it's time for the restoration. So now, in verse 3, let's see, where am I? Okay, a voice cries, in the wilderness prepare the way of the Lord, make straight in the desert a highway for our God. Every valley shall be lifted up, and every mountain and hill be made low. The uneven ground shall become level, and the rough places a plain. And the glory of the Lord shall be revealed, and all flesh shall see it together. For the mouth of the Lord has spoken. Okay? So again, we're back to, just that last, shall see it, for the mouth of the Lord has spoken. We're back to that passage in Isaiah 14. As I proposed, so it will be done. Isaiah 14:24. Okay? So, verses 3 through 5, again, this is one of the most common things. Okay, what is this passage talking about here? So again, it's comforting the nation, and the Isaiah is saying, okay, somebody needs to tell Israel this. Okay, and then we're answering the question: will God rescue Israel? Will God restore Israel? Okay, well, so here in answer, the voice cries, tell Israel this. Okay, a voice cries, in the wilderness prepare the way of the Lord, make straight in the desert a highway for our God. Now, if that passage sounds familiar, it's probably because it is quoted in all four Gospels referring to John the Baptist. Okay, now this gets into one of these interesting questions about prophecy and how prophecy works. Okay, now, is this saying that it's going to take John the Baptist's return in order for this to happen? Perhaps, and you can go that way, that's fine. But if you do go that way, you do have a problem with verse 4. And so verse 3 says, voice of one crying in the wilderness, prepare the way, make straight in the desert a highway for our God. Then in verse 4, every valley shall be lifted up, and every mountain and hill be made low, the uneven ground shall become level, and the rough places a plain. So he's saying that part of this conversation, part of this announcement, is a physical rendering of the landscape, of the geography. Okay, now did that happen with John the Baptist when John the Baptist came? No, it did not. Okay. Will it happen at some point in the future? Yes. Okay, with the new heaven and a new earth, I'm sure that will be part of that. Okay. So so there's clearly a link. Okay, under the inspiration of the Holy Spirit, 4 gospel writers all looked back and said, what John the Baptist is doing, that John the Baptist emerges, and again, when we talk about Luke, sometime in the future, we'll get into more about John the Baptist. But when John the Baptist came out announcing that you repent, the kingdom is nigh, he is doing what Isaiah predicted would happen. Somebody was going to come along and say this. Now, is John the Baptist the only one who could have done this? I don't think so. Okay, so John the Baptist clearly fits here. He's clearly fits in. He is within the realm of what Isaiah is prophesying. Okay, but again, you have to take into account what's talking about here in verse 4. Okay, did that happen? So, is this referring to John the Baptist? Yes. Yes, John the Baptist is fulfilling this. Okay, is this prophecy fully met, the John the Baptist version? No, because again, it's talking about the whole consummation of the kingdom as well, the new heaven and new earth. So it's a well out. So you could argue that all of this hasn't been taken care of yet. Okay, but so I think that here you have a situation where there could be a double fulfillment, and that is to say that there could be John the Baptist is one, and then there's going to be another fulfillment, whether it's going to be John the Baptist coming back, or Ezekiel coming, or Elijah, or something like that coming back, and then you're going to have this physical reconfiguring of the land. Okay, so but clearly, a voice of one crying in the wilderness taught. It's just clearly met by John the Baptist in each of the gospel accounts. Why? Because the mouth of the Lord has spoken. This is how he's going to do it. So there's going to be this ultimate fulfillment of this is going to be preceded by somebody saying that. And if you go to the book of Revelation, you've got a similar kind of picture where people are coming. The witnesses, the 2 witnesses that get killed, and all that. So again, there's a couple of different ways this can be fulfilled, in addition to what John the Baptist does in the gospel accounts. Okay, so now if I haven't completely confused you, let's move on to verse 6. And again, we're answering the question: will God rescue? Will God restore Israel? And how is he going to restore Israel? And what's going to happen here? And now we had in the first 3 verses, and these are actually stanzas, and again, this is a Hebrew poem. The first 3 verses is one stanza, and 3 through 6 is another stanza. 1 and 2 are one stanza, 3 through 6 are 3, 4, and 5 are another stanza. Okay, and now 6 through 9 are another stanza. Okay, and in the first one it was like, speak. Who's speaking? I don't know. In the second stanza, it's like a voice cries in the wilderness. Okay, there's a voice. There's a disembodied voice. We don't know who it is. Okay, now in the third stanza here in verse 6, a voice says, cry, and then somebody responds, and the somebody clearly is Isaiah. Okay, so verse 6, a voice says, cry, and I said, what shall I cry? Okay, so now what's interesting here to me is that if you look at this passage, especially 6 through 9, 6 through, let me double check here. Well, 6 through 11 has some similarity to Isaiah chapter 6. Now, if you remember in Isaiah chapter 6, and you hear the king Uzziah died, I saw the Lord, et cetera, and Isaiah hears the words, who shall I send and who will go for me? And it's, it's like, well, I'm a man of unclean lips and all that I'm not qualified. So here it's kind of a very similar. There's some similarities here. Not exactly the same. I don't know that it's a parallel account, but it's sort of a similar thing, because you have to ask yourself here in verse 6, a voice says, cry, and I said, what shall I cry? Okay. Now, the next several verses could be one of two things. The next several verses could be, this is what Isaiah is told to cry, or the reader is told to cry. This is part of his message. Or this could be Isaiah's commentary on why he feels he's not the one to do the crying. And I like the latter idea, especially as you get into verse 10 and 11. And here, look at it this way. And again, you don't really know, because all of the punctuation and things is different. So the NIV punctuates it one way, and the NIV punctuates it so that, there's quotation marks. The NIV punctuates it so that you see this quotation suggesting that this is part of it. The ESV doesn't, and the King James doesn't either. Okay, so these punctuation marks, as far as what's a quotation and what's not, these are something added by translators. Okay, so again, this is one of the interesting things about Bible translation. You think it's just a matter of this word means that word, this word means that word, but it's not. There's a lot of very subtle things that translators do that will drive how you understand a text, and this is one of them. Okay, so, and because there's no punctuation marks in the Hebrew that similar to the to the English way, we kind of have to look at it and go make a decision for ourselves. Okay, so let's look at this, and I think I'm going to read this as saying the next several verses are not part of what Isaiah is to cry. This is Isaiah's commentary on why he should not be the one doing the crying. Okay, it's still true. I mean, it doesn't change the truth of it. Okay, so don't get me wrong there. I'm just saying, kind of thinking about what's actually going on in this particular passage. Okay, so a voice says, cry, and I said, what shall I cry? And now Isaiah's commenting, here's why I shouldn't be the one making the message, okay? Because it says, all flesh is grass, and all its beauty is like the flowers of the field. Side note, that word beauty is actually the Hebrew word hesed. Okay, the Hebrew word hesed, which often is translated loving kindness and faithfulness and things like that. And I think the NIV translates it faithfulness. But this is the only time that this word hesed is translated this way. Anything other than loving kindness or long, those kind of concepts. Okay, because the idea of faithfulness, doesn't really fit. Okay. But regardless, so all flesh is grass, and all its beauty is like the flower of the field. The grass withers, the flower fades, when the breath of the Lord blows on it. Surely the people are grass. The grass withers, the flower fades, but the beauty of our God will stand forever. Okay, so again, but the word of our God will stand forever. And of course, if you're ever, if you're creating a theology of Scripture, and as far as the permanence of Scripture, you're going to come back to this verse, where the word of our God will stand forever. Okay, and that's true. That's true. But again, the whole message here is Isaiah is responding to this command to cry. What shall I cry? Here's why I shouldn't. All flesh is grass, and I'm just like grass. And if you say it, people are going to believe it. If I say it, nobody's going to believe it. Okay. Now there's another parallel here, or there's another echo of what took place in Isaiah 6, and that is, where he said, who will go? Who will go for me? Here am I, send me. And then the thing, and then in verses, I think it's 9 and 10 in chapter 6, where he says, you're going to go, you're going to be speaking and never hearing, and they're not going to understand you, kind of stuff here. Okay, so here Isaiah is saying, if I say it, it's not going to do anything. But if the word of our God, that's going to be something worth hearing. Okay, so the grass withers, the flower fades, when the breath of the Lord blows on it. Surely the people are grass. The grass withers, the flower fades, but the word of our God will stand forever. Now, in verse 9 here, we're going to get the here's what he should say. Okay, go on up to a high mountain, O Zion, herald of good news. Lift up your voice with strength, O Jerusalem, herald of good news. Lift it up, fear not. Say to the cities of Judah, and here's what you're going to say: behold, your God. Okay, and I think what here, let me read. In verse 10, behold, the Lord comes with might, and his arm rules for him. Behold, his reward is with him, and his recompense before him. He will tend his flock like a shepherd. He will gather the lambs in his arms. He will carry them in his bosom and gently lead those that are with young. Okay, so the message of what would, to me, looking at this passage, what's being requested, the message is for the speaker, whether it's Isaiah or somebody else, is to go to the nations of the cities of Judah and say, here's God. God is here. I mean, it kind of reminds me, and again, I know this is a fictional thing, but if you've seen, or if you've read the books of Lord of the Rings, or you've seen the movie, I think it's in the Two Towers. I don't know, but there's one scene where this great battle is going on, and they're looking doomed. They're looking like it's not going to last, and then all of a sudden, over the hill comes. They hear the trumpet, and then over the hill come the riders of Rohan, and it's this great moment where all of a sudden, this huge army has just appeared over the hill that they weren't expecting, they weren't anticipating, they were hoping for, but they weren't, And I think what the thing is, what the point here is that you're going to be that herald. You're going to be the one going, here is, behold your God, and he's saying this is it. So, and how's he going to do it? His arm rules for him. He comes with might. His arm rules with him. Behold, his reward is with him, and his recompense before him. He will tend his flock like a shepherd. He will gather the lambs in his arms. He will carry them in his bosom, and gently lead those that are with young. Okay, will God? Again, the first question: will God? Does Yahweh want to deliver us? Yes. You're his people. You're his flock. And side note, or not necessarily a side note, but it's interesting as you look at this last verse as he's talking about how this care is going to be. Again, this image, and again, Isaiah is a very important book. It was very important to the Jews at the time, to the Jews in Jesus' day, and when they pictured God, this is one of the passages they would look at, and look at what it says. Okay, in his recompense, he will tend his flock like a shepherd. He will gather the lambs in his arms. He will carry them in his bosom and gently lead those that are with the young. Now, how many times in the Gospels is Jesus portrayed or portrays himself? John chapter 10 is, I am the good shepherd. I am that good shepherd. So they had this picture, the Jews had this picture in their mind of God as a shepherd. Okay, and he will gather the lambs in his arms. He will carry them in his bosom and in his recompense before him. He will tend his flock like a shepherd. He will gather the lambs. He will carry them in his bosom and gently lead those that are in the young. And later on, let's see, where is it? Well, there's another passage. We'll get back to that in a minute. Okay, so this idea of the good shepherd. Jesus is a good shepherd. Clearly, yes. Okay. Now, beginning with verse 12, we're answering the question 2. Can Yahweh deliver us? Now, does God have the power to deliver us? Now, this is exactly the question that Sennacherib asks both the Rabshakeh announces in front of the people, and Sennacherib asks Hezekiah, it's like, hey, look at all these other guys that I've destroyed. Look at how big my army is. You can't do this. And so here in verses 12 through 26, we're answering the question, can God? And here it's a little more rhetorical. It's not quite as much to discuss here, but look at it. Who has measured the water in the hollow of his hand? Now, does this sound kind of like one of the statements of God to Job? But regardless, who has measured the waters in the hollow of his hand and marked off the heavens with a span, and closed the dust of the earth in a measure, and weighed the mountains in scales and the hills in balance? Who has measured the Spirit of the Lord, or what man shows him his counsel? Whom did he consult, and who made him understand? Who taught him the paths of righteousness, or the path of justice? I'm sorry, the NIV translates that right way. Okay, who did this and taught him knowledge and showed him the way of understanding? Okay, clearly the answer here is no one. There's no one like our God. And he finishes the thought in verse 15. Behold, the nations are like a drop from a bucket. The NIV says a drop in a bucket. Okay, and are accounted as a dust on the scales. Behold, he takes up the coastlines like fine dust. Okay, can God rescue? Can God restore Israel? Yes. It's clearly yes. Lebanon, verse 16, Lebanon would not suffice for fuel, nor are its beasts enough for a burnt offering. So Lebanon was known for its wood, the cedars of Lebanon. So if you were to look at it, so Lebanon is kind of standing in this synecdoche, this part standing for a whole, kind of like, the gold in Fort Knox. We could talk about the gold in Fort Knox. Is that all of the money? Although you have to have all the gold in Fort Knox, is that all the money in the world? No, but it represents, it's symbolic of all the money in the world. The gold in Fort Knox kind of stuff here, and I think that's how Lebanon is being used here. Verse 18, he kind of takes it a little different tact in answering this question. Okay, as far as can God? To whom then will you liken God, or what likeness compare with him? An idol? An idol? A craftsman casts it, and the goldsmith overlays it with gold and casts it for its silver chains. He who is too impoverished for an offering chooses wood that will not rot. He seeks out a skillful craftsman to set up an idol that will not move. You know, so really, seriously, you're just going to make an idol isn't going to do anything for you. Okay? And then 20 verses in 21, he starts with his, what I'm calling this thunderous conclusion to this passage. Okay? Do you not know? Do you not hear? Okay, again, going back to what Isaiah, you're going to talk to them and they're not going to hear what he's saying. Listen, you've been told. Has it not been told you from the beginning? Have you not understood from the foundations of the earth? It is he who sits above the circle of the earth, and its inhabitants are like grasshoppers. Kind of just putting God as being outside of this. God, I did a message one time where we were talking about, God is being outside of the box. We talk about thinking inside the box. That God is by definition outside of the box. That's what holiness means. Holiness, being holy, is just being other. That you've got all of these things that are the same, and then you've got something that's holy, which is other. And then one of the outstanding characteristics or defining characteristics of God is his otherness, that he is not part of us. Okay, and this kind of puts it above. Now I know there are some people that will look at this verse and go, oh, look here, this just shows the Bible is scientifically accurate because it recognizes the circle, being a globe, and it's not a flat earth thing. Like, well, okay, whatever. I don't think that's really the point Isaiah's trying to make here. I don't think he's sitting there when he's writing this thinking, I need to throw in something so that those flat earthers in the 17th and in the 21st century have a proof text that we can use. I don't think that's quite the point. I think it's just showing God is not contingent. Okay, so again, it isn't that God is worn out or tired because of all of what's going on. He's still God. He can still do all of this. Okay, so again, we're answering the question, can God rescue them? Certainly he can. Who brings princes to nothing? Verse 23, and verse 22, it is he who sits above the circle of the earth, and its inhabitants are like grasshoppers, who stretches out the heavens like a curtain, and spreads them like a tent to dwell in, who brings princes to nothing, and makes the rulers of the earth as emptiness. Scarcely are they planted, scarcely sown, scarcely has their stem taken root in the earth, when he blows on them, and they wither, and the tempest carries them off like a stubble. Again, this idea of the Lord blowing on them, and kind of repeats what he said in verse 7 here. To whom then? Here's the big question, okay? And I think he draws in the shepherd image here. This was the verse I was looking for a minute ago. To whom then will you compare me, that I should be like him, says the Holy One? Lift up your eyes on high and see. Who created these? He who brings out their host by number, calling them all by name, by the greatness of his might, and because he is strong in power, not one is missing. Couple that with the picture of the shepherd, and go fast forward into Luke chapter 15, where Jesus tells the parable of the 90 and 9, where the shepherd leaves the 99 for the one. I wonder if he's drawing on this picture, that God is somebody who is so powerful and yet so loving that not one is missing, not one sheep is missing. So I think there's, you could probably bring there's probably a link there. But the question here is that his power is not dependent on how big the battle was. Okay, he's not contingent on that. He is not, the one doesn't affect the other. Okay, so can God restore Israel? Certainly he can. And then verse 27, we start the third question, and that is, will God restore Israel? Okay. Verse 27, why do you say, O Jacob, and speak, O Israel, my way is hidden from the Lord, and my right is disregarded by my God? Have you not heard? Have you not known? Have you not heard? The Lord is the everlasting God, the creator of the ends of the earth. He does not grow faint. He does not faint or grow weary. His understanding is unsearchable. He gives power to the faint, and to him who has no might, he increases strength. So again, here he's kind of repeating this idea of not being contingent, and he's saying, listen, and refer back to the passage, in Isaiah 14, as I purpose, so it will be. That does, again, the question is, will God? Yes, that was part of his promise. That God not being contingent is the one that's going to provide the strength. He is going to provide the abilities. Okay? He gives power to the faint, and to him who has no might, he increases strength. Even youths shall faint and be weary, and young men shall fall exhausted. So all these other things are contingent upon what they ate and what they feel and how hot it is, and all these things affect people. And if you've tried to go out on a walk on a very hot day, you know exactly what he's talking about here. You're contingent. We humans, we're contingent on external factors. And God's saying, I'm not. I'm the one that's going to provide. I'm going to provide the strength. I'm going to provide the vigor. And what is the requirement? Again, verse 31. Perhaps the best known verse, one of the best known verses in all of Isaiah. But they who wait for the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings like eagles. They shall run and not be weary. They shall walk and not faint. Okay? So, in other words, the answer is, does God want to? Well, yes. He's not contingent. He's not affected. It's part of his promise. Yes. Is God going to restore them? Okay, so chapter 40, again, is a transition chapter. It gets us into the second part of Isaiah, where God is talking to, or God through Isaiah is talking to those in exile, those who have seen the God work, and they're wondering what the next step is going to be. Okay, so again, it's kind of a human nature. Whatever position you're in, you're always kind of wondering, okay, what's next? And here God is promising those that wait. And this is not Isaiah 40, what is it? Isaiah chapter 26, Isaiah 30. There's also things where the Lord said, wait. And then why wait? Because that's where you're going to get your strength. That's when you're going to get your strength from me. So, all right. Well, thank you very much for being with me today. Next week, we're going to crank back into chapter 41 and move on into, hopefully, ending Isaiah here at some point. So we're well past the halfway point. And thank you for being with me. And I hope you have a great, I didn't say anything about it. This is a Labor Day weekend, so I hope you have a great Labor Day weekend. And I will see you guys next week.